So guys, Jordan Peterson uploaded this video, or it's uploaded to Daily Wire, Jordan B Peterson. So he's on Daily Wire now. So this is a pretty common question. Do you believe in God? What does that question really mean? So he goes into it. I'm probably going to play about 5 minutes of this, and then I'm going to explain what's wrong with it, why it seems like such a complicated subject, why I think the question is kind of silly, and I'll explain what God is and how you can absolutely know exactly what God is. So let me just that's a pretty tall claim, but bear with me. Let's just play this for a few minutes so we can get. He kind of gives like the standard take on it. So here we go.
Do I believe in God? And I don't like that question. And people have complained at me a lot, and I'm sure they have their reasons because they don't like my answers, and I have two answers. They've kind of become stock, which is not a good thing. But they're the best approximate. I can't figure out why I don't like the question exactly. I had three sort of burgeoning hypotheses. One was, it's none of your damn business. That's the first one. So it's like a privacy issue. Like it seemed to me to be a question that was too private to be answered properly. And so, you could consider that a cop-out, and maybe it is. And then another one was, well, what do you mean by believe? Like, do you mean the words? Do you mean to say the words, I believe in God? Does that indicate that you believe in God? Like, I don't know what you mean by believe exactly, because, and that's got me in trouble too, because, people think that attempting to clarify the meaning of words is an attempt to escape from the question when it's actually an attempt to specify the question. I mean, is what you believe what you say or what you act out? Now, I would say to some degree it's both, but if push comes to shove, as far as I'm concerned, what you believe is what you act out, not what you say. And then, and if you're an integrated person, then what you act out and what you say are the same thing, and then you're a person whose word can be trusted, right? Because what you say and what you do are isomorphic. They're the same thing. But belief is instantiated in action. So I have also suggested that I act as if I believe in God, or to the best of my ability. And people aren't very happy with that either. And then the third is that I'm afraid that he might exist, which I think is the most comical of the three answers and perhaps the most accurate one. But then I was thinking about this today when I was thinking about what I might talk to you guys about. And I thought, well, let's go into this a little bit more. Let's say you do believe in God. You say, I believe in God. It's like, okay, well, that's hypothetically pretty impressive, I would say. It's like you believe that there's a divine power that oversees everything, that is fundamentally ethical, that's watching everything you do, and you believe that. And so what effect does that have on your behavior if you believe it? Does that mean that are you all in on your beliefs? Are you sacrificing everything to this transcendent entity that you proclaim belief in? Have you cleansed yourself of all your sin, let's say? Are you making all the sacrifices that you need to make? Like, have you taken the mote out of your eye? No? Or are you in the same situation, let's say, that the Catholic Church seems to be in right now? Just out of curiosity, it's a good time to bring that up since the Pope seems to be concerned with what's been happening with the Catholic Church, given the endless pedophilic scandals, let's say, which seem rather serious in my estimation and might have been something that was cleaned up perhaps 100 or 1,000 years ago. And it's being taken seriously perhaps now and perhaps not, because it's not so easy to determine exactly what it would mean to take that seriously. And you might say, well, are all the people who are committing these heinous actions and then covering them up, if you ask them, well, do you believe in God? what are they going to say? Well, you'd think the answer would be yes, given that they're like priests, and and yet, and yet, what's the evidence? Well, the evidence isn't exactly so clear that the mere statement, let's say, or the mere acting out of the ritual, let's say, and I'm not trying to denigrate the statement or the ritual, but I'm pointing out that that's no indication of you're right to say that you believe, because you got it. And I think this is why it's bothered me to answer this question. It's like, well, what right do I have to say that, to make that claim? I believe in God. Well, what's the claim? Is that the claim that I'm a good person somehow? Because you'd think that if you believed in God, actually, like seriously, that you'd be a good person, like right now, because, well,
Okay, let's.
well, for obvious reasons, I would think.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack here, but I'll do my best here. So, he never really, like he said, definitions are really important, but he never actually gave a definition of what God is. He more or less gave it, distinction between belief and action, which is a fair enough distinction. It's a common charge against people who believe in some kind of God, especially Christians, that even though they say they believe in God, their actions are to the contrary, as in the case of the Catholic Church. And we'll get to that. But first, I want to actually define what God is, because that's super important to answering this question. A lot of people think that God is like the figure of Zeus, because what happened with Michelangelo's painting, he painted this image of God that was kind of copied from the image of Zeus of Greco-Roman mythology. So it kind of, from that point on, kind of laid this image out there for people. But what I want to do first is I want to look at the word God, which has an etymological origin here. So this is Etym Online. This is etymology, which is the history of the word. The word God comes from Old English, which means supreme being, deity, the Christian God, image of a God, godlike person, which actually came from a Proto-Germanic gutan, and whatever, we'll skip that, which is of uncertain origin, but perhaps from Proto-Indo-European gut, which means that which is invoked, or from Sanskrit huta, invoked, and to call, invoke. Down here it says to pour a libation. So it's something that's coming out, that's being invoked, or is the invoker. It's the act of invocation or invocation, something like that. This is not going to really get us that close, but if, in a general sense, God applies to many different so-called deities, right? So it could be the Hindu God, it could be the Buddhist God, it could be any number of gods, Zoroastrian God, the Jain God, whatever, right? But in terms of Christianity, the word is actually used in place of the Tetragrammaton, which is the original Hebrew, a Hebrew theonym, which looks like this. Those are the Hebrew letters, Yud, Hai, Vav Hai, something like that. And if you look here, it says the name may be derived from a verb that means to be, to exist, to cause to become, or to come to pass. Now, this Wikipedia article doesn't really go into a whole lot of detail here, but I've independently looked up all of these letters, and there's some cause to think that this is actually a type of acronym where each letter means something else and refers to some fundamental aspect of creation, like to cause, to destroy, to that which in which things are caused, and that unto which they are terminated, something to that effect. But we could say that all in all, it simply means to exist or to come to pass, to be or to exist. I like to exist, and a good reason for that is we could just simply say that God is existence. And this is I'm setting up a definition here, but I'm going to provide. It sounds a little bit wacky, right, to people who probably believed in this Zeus image their whole lives. But this is the Tetragrammaton. This is from the original Hebrew uh, word for God, right? And of course, the Hebrews use Adonai and Hashem and other things, but you've probably heard of this before too. I am that I am. Um, he who is, he who causes to exist. So these are the generally accepted translations. Here's Adonai, Elohim, and then you get Jehovah, Yahweh. Uh, you also get that out of there because YHWH, add in a couple vowels, and you get Yahweh. So, anyways, but outside of like the word itself, in a Christian context, we have the saints of the Catholic Church. Where he was talking about the Catholic Church, so we'll stick with Catholicism for now. So we have the ontological argument by Saint Anselm. Saint Anselm of Canterbury originated the ontological argument, which basically tend to refer to the state of being or existing. What the ontological argument is to say that God is that than which nothing greater can be thought. And we'll find that wording in here somewhere. Perhaps not, but that's how he formulated it, that than which nothing greater can be thought. So just in a general sense, if you have two things, then those two things occupy a domain, and the domain is greater than the things themselves, right? So and then if you posit another domain besides that domain, then those two domains exist within another domain, which then becomes the greatest thing that can be thought. So you really have to extrapolate out what is the greatest thing that can be thought, and what you end up with is, oh, here it is, a being than which no greater can be conceived. What you end up with is existence, all of existence, everything that exists, and even that which doesn't exist, except for it doesn't exist. So it's not existing. So God refers to existing, which makes statements like this, existence of God, as being somewhat redundant. Since God is existent, then you saying God exists is a redundant statement and actually adds a bit of confusion to the overall thing. So bear with me because, like say some people believe God to be the Zeus image. So here we have St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologica, where he replies to various objections to the ontological argument. And in reply to objection 2, he says, perhaps not everyone who hears this word God understands it to signify something than which nothing greater can be thought, seeing that some have believed God to be a body. So that addresses that particular claim that God is the Michelangelo's image, Zeus-like image. This is a defense by St. Thomas Aquinas, a Catholic saint, as to what is actually meant by God, is meaning that than which nothing greater can be thought. So, nor can it be argued that it actually exists unless it is admitted that there actually exists something than which nothing greater can be thought, and this precisely is not admitted by those who hold that God does not exist. So, but again, existence is the greatest thing that can be thought. So we really shouldn't be talking about whether or not God exists. We should be talking about God as existence. The language is really confusing there, but I want to point to a couple of examples here too, because a couple of biblical examples, because in Jordan Peterson's statements he had mentioned benevolent God. And this is something that a lot of people also think. Not only is God some kind of man-like figure, and also a he, but we can get into why he is used. It's part of the active passive. Uh, the masculine and feminine are representative of the active and passive in some philosophy, especially ancient philosophy around this time period. So but that's a slightly different discussion. We can kind of just ignore the pronouns for now. But let's talk about the benevolence, because the claim is often made that God is all benevolent, and I want to demonstrate that that's not actually the case. So let's take a look here at Isaiah 45:7. I form the light and create the darkness. I bring prosperity and create disaster. I, the Lord, do all these things. That's the NIV. The King James Version says, I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. So the Bible itself is not ascribing only good things to God. It's saying God does everything, the light and the dark, good and evil, and we can extrapolate from that everything else that could possibly exist. Another example here, Romans 9. For he saith to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. So then it is not of him, and I usually use this to kind of disprove free will. So then it is not of him that willeth, nor of him that runneth, but of God that showeth mercy. Therefore he has mercy on who he will have mercy, and whom he will he hardeneth. Thou wilt say then unto me, why doth he yet find fault? For who hath resisted his will? Nay, but, O man, who art thou that replies against God? Shall the thing formed say to that formed it, why hast thou made me thus? So, with respect to God's benevolence, again, it's saying here, and there's other examples in the Bible where God basically dooms people to experiencing his wrath. It's basically saying here that God will destine people to experiencing his wrath. And if you are questioning that, the real question is, why are you questioning it? It's like if you believe in the universe, you believe in existence, you don't hold it to the same kind of questioning, right? You don't ask existence or the universe why it did something. It just did. I do think that it's a good question though, and even though even though he kind of pushes back on this, he does go on to say, hath not the potter power over the clay of the same lump to make one vessel unto honor and another unto dishonor? What if God, willing to show his wrath and to make his power known, endured with much long suffering the vessels of wrath fitted to destruction? So this is the important part. In order for God's wrath to be known, there have to be people destined to experience it. And then the same with mercy, and that he might make known the riches of his glory on the vessels of mercy, which he had afore prepared unto glory. So again, it says that down here. Somewhere about Pharaoh. I'm having a hard time finding it because this isn't the version I usually use, but I usually just, oh, this is King James Version. But the general idea is that there we go, what if, oh, this is the same part. So the point being that he creates some vessels unto dishonor and dishonors them, and he creates some vessels unto honor and he honors them. So that's an important point. Now, all of this stuff is kind of a mystery. It probably seems very mysterious at this point. If we go to Proverbs, where Solomon is saying, my son, if thou wilt receive my words and hide my commandments with thee, so that thou incline thine ear unto wisdom and apply thine heart to understanding, if you criest after knowledge and liftest up thy voice for understanding, if thou seekest her as silver and searchest for her as for hid treasures, then shalt thou understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. So I think this is important because it's saying, it's not an obvious thing. it's going to take some figuring out, some seeking, and some trying to understand. But eventually, you will be able to find the knowledge of God. So again, it's not even about belief; it's about knowledge. So that's where, if we take the image of God as Zeus or whatever, you're never going to know that. You can only believe in that or not believe in that. But in terms of Anselm's argument and Aquinas's um, defense of that argument, and also what it says in the Bible, um, this is something that could be known. Like it's like knowing existence. It's like knowing things exist. Knowing that there's some kind of overall unity behind all of existence, and that's where it gets into the unity side of it, right? So it's not just that existence exists, but what we mean by existence is everything tied together into one thing, basically. And that's where the issue of knowing that God exists and acting as if you know God exists are actually two different things. On the one hand, by saying that you know God exists, is saying that you know that everything is tied together into this one thing, which is God, which would include yourself, include your own self, right? You're not a separate thing from God at that point. If you were, then God could not be everything. You wouldn't exist as a result of or in consequence of God. Um, there's this part in here where Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is inside and outside. Um, that's a generally accepted notion that God is inside of us in our hearts or something like that. I'm going to say God permeates every cell because as would existence, right, permeates every cell. And due to that, even our psychological sense of self, our individuality, is actually part of God. So here we run into the fundamental problem of religion, which is I experience myself as an individual separated from everything else, and yet I know that I don't exist outside of this unified uh, existence, which is God. So I don't really exist. The only thing that does exist is God, but yet I experience myself as an individual. So this leads to me having a will, which is what I want to do, and then God having a will, right? Since the universe or existence is going to do its thing, and then truth be known, since I'm not any different, I'm not separated from God. I'm going to do whatever God wants me to do too, but I might think it's my own idea. I might feel like it's my own will, even if it is actually the will of God. And where this creates the issue of, well, why would God will priests in the Catholic Church to commit these horrible abuses? And the answer to that is because they experience themselves as individuals. Um, by creating that sense of individuality, that sense of being an individual, people are therefore motivated by their sense of individuality. And to put it more concretely, the self as it is doesn't have an identity of its own, so it has to look out into the world to find things to identify with. For example, identifying with your skin color, identifying with your age or your height or something like that. These are the external symbols that we use to construct our sense of self. And the self doesn't really exist outside of that. And there's a whole bunch of sociological theory and neuroscience and stuff that kind of shows that as well. I won't get into that since we're just talking about Christianity and Catholicism here. But the idea is that these priests do not experience themselves as God, even though whether they know God, they know of God or understand God in the way that I've described, probably not. They probably think of God in some erroneous way. Uh, and then on top of that, they also have this sense of individuality, which kind of corrupts their vision of the world, right? Since we don't see the world uh, through God's eyes, so to speak, we don't see the world in its or the universe or existence in its totality. We only see it through our limited egocentric point of view. And with that also comes the desire for concretion, the desire to form some type of identification with the world. And with that also comes self evaluation, which is where we measure ourselves up against other people in the world and we do comparisons, contrast, and compare. And we also have these biological needs like sex, right? So if we take a priest who has aspired to be a priest, that is, he's self identified as a priest, and as such needs to live up to certain moral standards in order to satisfy the sociological evaluation of him as a priest. Since if a priest says, hey, I'm celibate, but then people see that he's married or something, that doesn't really add up, right? So what this means is that the priest's sexual motivations become repressed. They're repressed through the need for identification with the priesthood and through the sociological self evaluation, like reflected appraisals. He intuitively knows if he seeks out sexual gratification, that's going to undermine his sociological image as this priest, right? So that leads to repressed sexuality, and that becomes manifest in these horrors, in these atrocities. Uh, and the priest probably, in some respect, hates himself for it, but didn't ever really quite understand himself or understand any of what he supposedly practices. So that's why that's the result. You can see the logical progression there from God is everything that exists, yet we have an experience of individuality which depends on identification with sociological categories, in this case, a priest, and there's certain social obligations that come with that in order to maintain the value of that presentation, and that leads to repressed sexuality, which then leads to this type of expression of that repressed sexuality. So that's where you can know God exists or God is, or you can know God to remove all the redundancy. You can know God and yet still act out of some kind of self-interest, out of some limited human self-interest with human drives and motives and stuff, because our point of view is very very limited. It's egocentric, and we aren't God, right? He goes on in the video, and I'll cover this briefly. He goes on in the video to talk about Jesus and how Jesus didn't identify with God, and so maybe Jesus and God are not the same thing. That creates this challenge that, in some ontological sense they're not the same thing, but in another ontological sense they are the same thing, because at the top level where God is existence, they are the same in the sense that Jesus is part of God, is part of existence, right? So they are one and the same. But yet, Jesus, the man, is not equivalent to God as existence, right? Like the fact that I exist means that I'm within God, but I'm not God as God. Like God, they say in philosophy, qua, which means in the form of or as. So God qua God would be God as existence or as the totality um, or being, and me qua me would just be the limited individual human form, right? So me qua God would be the error, right? Because I'm not in the form of God, so to speak. So, and that this point of view lines up perfectly with all of these kinds of sayings, right? Like if you ask a Jehovah's Witness, well, I ask my Jehovah's Witness friend what God is, he says God is the ground of being. It's something we probably all heard. God is the ground of being. Well, that makes sense if we're speaking of God as basically this existence. Now, there's certain qualities to existence that we're not covering here, right? Um, well, we could cover them, but it's going to end up being kind of a long video. But the general idea is this centers around our perception, our limited egocentric perception, which is very dualistic. We view the world in opposites and often very extreme opposites, like good and evil. We look at the world, we know what our wants and desires and values are, and then based on those desires, we consider whether or not something is good or bad for that desire. And so we create this distinction, this division of things that's fitting into one of these two categories, and which is self-serving. It's completely based on what it is that we desire or what our moral intuitions are. Whereas we could say that from the point of view of existence, it's there is no good or bad, right? It's just there. It just is. It's not good or bad unless the if the goal was to continue to sustain existence and all of those things involved did that, then they would all be good, right? So in that way, we could say that God was benevolent, but um, to our individual perspective, there are in our individual desires and goals, there are things that are good for that and things that are bad for that. So if our goal is like a sustained existence or sustained individuality, then murder is bad, right? Because that puts an end to it. So we would label murder bad because to us it's bad, and yet from a God's eye perspective, it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? There, and here's the other thing: there's another duality, which is life and death. We we have this extreme opposite between living and being dead, and that's how we perceive the world, right? But what I would say is that since we're all part of God, like when you think about it that way, if you identify with that superstructure, the superclass or ontological superset, which is God, and you kind of start to dissociate with the individuality that you appear to exist in, um, then nothing ever really lives or dies. Everything is part of the quote unquote living God, and even when you die, it's still God, right? You just as an individual don't exist anymore as an individual, but your parts decay and worms eat them, and they uh, they convert it into soil and nutrients, which then plants grow out of, and the cycle continues, right? Um, so you don't really die in that sense. But the other thing is, you've never really been alive either, since um, being alive would imply that life started at some point when it actually just aggregated into a form that thought that it was living, right? So, it, like I say, you have to keep digging away at the layers here, but the idea is that the psychological self that we think is a persistent, subsistent entity, something that started when we were born and then ends when we die, is actually an illusion. The self is created every moment out of the aggregation of these different processes. So every moment we have the thought of I, and because our brain stores memories, we often have that thought of I within the context of those memories. But the I is not a subsistent thing, which means that it exists over time in the same way. Instead, it's created anew every moment, but it has the appearance of having existed over time through the brain storing memories. But essentially, this is true of neuroscience, and you can look that up if you want. But the general idea is that you've never actually existed as this self-subsistent thing, but only as a thought or an idea in a brain, right? In some part of the universe or some part of God, right? So you never really even lived to begin with, and there's nothing there that's gonna die. The only thing that happens is the thought of I stops recurring. It stops being created by the aggregate processes of the brain. So when you do quote unquote die, you just stop creating. The I stops being created. You don't do anything. The I just stops being created. And this is we focused on Christianity and everything here, but this is true in a physical universe. All of this stuff is exactly the same in a physical account of the universe. All of us, or a naturalist view of the universe. And Baruch Spinoza, famous naturalist philosopher, basically said as much in his writings. His whole philosophy is it's a transcendental idealism or a monism, but his whole philosophy is exactly that, just outside of a Christian context. And he even admitted that basically it was the same thing as the Christian God. He just divorced it from Christianity and turned it into a naturalist framework. The same, and again, you can map this onto every religion in the world, every sustained religion, whether it's Hinduism, in that case, Brahman is the ultimate thing than which nothing greater can be thought. There's a whole bunch of different little forces, like different little gods that play a role in the Hindu pantheon and the drama that that's portrayed. But when you peel back all the layers, there's like so many extra layers in Hinduism. You peel back all the layers, you arrive at the same conclusion that the self doesn't really exist as a subsistent thing, that nothing ever really lives or dies in that sense, and that Brahman is everything, and including the self. And again, Buddhism, same thing. Buddha described the self as the result of aggregates, and his aggregates, I couldn't tell you what they all are, but they were they were pretty on point. But we could take those aggregates and basically relate it to the brain as well. And the Buddhists don't really deny the existence of a brain or anything like that. So, but their aggregates were more like in principle aggregates rather than physical structures or anything like that. But again, Buddha is the only thing that exists. Everything is Buddha. The self doesn't exist. It's not a real thing as a subsistent thing. It's a real thing as I'm thinking about myself right now, but 10 minutes from now I could be dead and then I'm not, right? And the self that I was 10 minutes ago is not the same self as I am now. It's completely new self, right? So again, I kind of commented all this on that YouTube video, and I'm probably going to get blasted by a bunch of people now, because really nobody thinks like this. Everybody thinks God is some kind of Zeus-like character flying around on a cloud, zapping people with lightning, or that he's concerned with all these like petty human issues and has something to say about all these things. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that the original biblical authors were inspired by this wisdom, and through that inspiration they decided, well, this is what we should do. This is what uh, the universe this is the universe's plan or the will of God, in as abstracted away from our individual wills, which are simply focused on things like procreation or whatever, right? So, what does the universe really want? Well, it wants us to be fruitful and multiply. So, based on that, like, it wants us to reproduce and create more human beings. That's our kind of the natural course of things. So, based on that, doing things like homosexuality doesn't result in that. It only results in self-satisfaction, self-pleasure, enjoyment, things that are only really important to human beings, that is following the human will side of things, right? And not the God's will side of things. So that's the distinction made there. Now the biblical authors would have included that because of this inspiration, that's the conclusion that they came to. Now, they came to a bunch of other conclusions to do with the state of their societies at the time as to what you should do, but this, again, was all based on their limited understanding, their limited human perception, their limited knowledge of society and what it could be, and things like that. And so some of them, and we have to keep in mind that these are all there's a bunch of different authors there that they're all maybe inspired by this wisdom, but they all have different ideas of how that actually applies to life. So, they come up with some pretty crazy adaptations, let's say, that aren't really applicable to modern life. It's been thousands of years, society has changed, our human experience has evolved, and now we can apply this wisdom in other ways. Not to say that the ways that we apply it now will be applicable in another 2 or 3 thousand years. I'm sure society will evolve, people will learn things, and will want to come up with different rules for life or whatever. But and so that's an important distinction, because people often attack that too, right? Well, the Bible says, God said, do this. And in terms of the language there, that's another thing that really confuses things. The fact that God is anthropomorphized so much in ancient philosophy, in the time of Plato and Aristotle and all these religions, when they believed that speech and reason and logic and causality were all kind of intertwined, that using speech like God said is almost like saying God caused, rather than an actual speech. And the evidence for that is kind of in the translation of John 1:1, where John says, in the beginning was the logos, or the word, right? So logos, the Greek word logos, means both speech and reason, both speech and logic. So it could be translated into word, or it could be translated into logic. And that's where we get that kind of crossover, right? So saying that in the beginning, or God spoke, is simply saying God caused. It's not a literal speech the way that we think about it. But again, a lot of this stuff is written in metaphor. And the prophecy of Isaiah, if you want to look that up here, let's look that up. Uh, in them will be fulfilled the. I don't know exactly what the passage is, but in them, so Matthew 13. Let's go to the context. Here it is. This is why I speak to them in parables. Remember, a parable is like a fable. It's not to be taken literally, but there's hidden wisdom in it to be extracted. This is why I speak to them in parables. Though seeing they do not see, though hearing they do not hear or understand, in them the prophecy of Isaiah is fulfilled. You will be ever hearing but never understanding. You will be ever seeing but never perceiving. For this people's hearts, this people's heart has grown callous. They hardly hear with their ears, and they have closed their eyes. Otherwise, they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn, and I would heal them. So, point being that the entire speech that Jesus gives, and much of the Old Testament, Solomon here refers to it as riddles and sayings of the wise. I think we lost that. It's in Proverbs. I'm just gonna search for it because he refers to it as riddles and sayings of the wise when he's talking about the Old Testament. Proverbs 1. So I was looking at Proverbs 2. Proverbs 1. Let the wise listen and gain instruction, and the discerning acquire wise counsel by understanding the proverbs and parables, the sayings and riddles of the wise. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and discipline. So this is the point, is that much of the Bible, the Old Testament, the New Testament, it's riddles, parables, similitudes, fables, things that give one impression but actually mean something a little bit different. And there's discipline and effort involved in understanding it and parsing out what the knowledge is behind it. So that's the thing, is like God is anthropomorphized partially because of the ancient understanding of words like logos, that they mean two different things, and also to give a false impression in order